Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Global Math Department webinar tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, let me please explain how these meetings work. These meetings are recorded and are available within 24 hours after the meeting ends. To view the recording, you can use the same URL you used to get here tonight. The Global Math community prides itself on being friendly and supportive. The chat room is available for topical and general conversation throughout the meeting. I will catch your questions for the presenter, so don't worry that the presenter won't notice your questions in the chatter. Our speaker tonight is Matt Coaty. Let me give you a little background on him. He has spent the last 13 years in his current position as a K through 6th grade math teacher in the Chicago suburbs. Prior to that, he was a 4th grade classroom teacher. He advocates and enjoys creating meaningful math opportunities for students. He writes about his adventures in and out of the classroom at mattcoaty.com. With that, I will turn it over to Matt. Remember, Matt, I will try and capture all of the questions so you don't have to worry about the chat box unless you're just there and you want to grab them. It's all you, Matt.
Okay, thank you, Jill. So like Jill stated, I'm Matt, and I teach in the suburbs of Chicago. I mainly work with kindergarten through up to 6th grade math, and most of my day is spent with 3rd through 6th grade, and I get a little bit of time with the kindergarten, 1st grade kids as well. So tonight, I'm going to be talking about student math reflections and how I use them across all grade levels. The examples you'll see are more for the upper grades, more of 5th, 6th grade level. And it's been something I've been working on over the past couple of years, specifically. So tonight, this is basically your table of contents for tonight. We're going to look at students' math identities. We're looking at current perceptions in the classroom. Our practices, our current practices, hopeful practices, better practices. I put better practices in there because I feel like best practices is overused. So I went with better practices there. Student goals and then reflections, the goals part 2, and then eventually to progress monitoring. How do we actual measure and progress monitor when students make goals in the math classroom? So to start, I'd like to talk a little bit about math identity. And throughout this presentation, you're going to find that there are some images or actual communications, more so regarding like my experience and then how it connects to how my practice has changed over time. In elementary school, what I remember about math was it was either you were amazing at it and great or good, or you were horrible, not good, messy. Your handwriting was horrible. You know, I felt more in the not good area when I was in elementary school. And I remember the stigma that was associated with that, without that piece. Through elementary and middle school, these terms were used when I grew up: flexible grouping, ability grouping, tracking. You were in one bird group, you know, the bluebirds, the cardinals, the crows, you know, whatever it was, whatever group you were in. It was, you know, based on ability, and you were given different types of problems than other groups. And I remember that stigma and that separation within the elementary classroom. And so that perception kind of stuck throughout my elementary experience and into middle school. And this slide is actually, many of you will pick up on it. Mario Brothers, regular Nintendo system, and there's 5 seconds left, and you've got to reach the flag, and you're going to run out of time. And I just remember time tests were huge in elementary and even at the beginning of middle school. You know, do you know your basic facts? Can you repeat them in 1 minute, the mad minutes? And it just really brought about a lot of anxiousness within inside me. And I think sometimes our students can relate to that as well if they're given mad minutes or things like that. In high school, those desks were in rows. Tests, I don't know if you can see it on the on the slide, but there wasn't Twitter around when I was in school. Desmos was not a thing. There was no virtual reality. We didn't have tablets or iPads, so it was a lot of paper pencil, a lot of sitting in rows, a lot of Scantrons. So not really engaging experience. School was something that was done to us or to me, and I wasn't really a part of that experience. And I remember wanting to change it even as a high school student. So I have to ask, how has that experience actually changed? For students or for teachers, and it's not a trick question, but how has that changed? Even with the addition of technology and with more of guided math models and collaboration and pieces like that, how has that truly changed the experience? And how do students perceive what is going on in my room, in the classrooms that I teach? Do they have the same perception? Do they feel like math is like you have to play the game, you have to get in the right group, you're on the right track? It has me wondering specifically, and I interviewed a fifth grader today for a class that I was taking, and this was the quote here. Math is either insanely hard or extremely simple, and there's no gray area. I think sometimes students feel that way. You either get it or you don't. And I wanted to make this experience for students better than either having just I'm great at it or I'm not great at it. So I wanted to look for better practices. These are the current practices that I sometimes see. Students turn in an assignment, teacher grades it, you review the answers of the class. It either goes on the fridge, and then eventually at some point it's going to be recycled. And so I wanted to turn more of a metacognition lens on that. And this slide was actually adapted from an Annie Forrest presentation that she let me borrow for this. So eventually tests and assignments, they get recycled, but what are the lasting effects of these assignments and tasks? So I know they're important, at least to the teacher, the tasks and assessments, but I tend to wonder, how can the students be more of a part of it? How can they take ownership of the actual assessment itself, of the process? Because I mean, in my situation, I'm thinking sometimes kids take 45 minutes on an assessment, on a test. Is it worth that amount of time, and how much are they getting out of it than just looking at the paper, seeing the grade and tossing it or putting it in their desk? So I wanted students to take more of an ownership role in their learning experience. These are 4 particular books that I have found very useful. And really, I've used every one of these within this presentation. That 7 strategies of assessment for learning is really where I went ahead and I took a lot of material and quotes for this particular presentation right from there, with reflections and things like that. Many of you are probably already familiar with these, and Powerful Teaching is another one that I wanted to add to the list. After this was created, that's another amazing book that I used some of that for this particular presentation. So I read the literature, and I wanted to make some changes to students' math experiences. So 4 things in particular that I thought might be beneficial moving forward, and this journey started about 5 years ago, and I've slowly, incrementally made progress. Introducing retakes, that was one thing. Having students analyze their assessments was another. Reflections and awareness, and then eventually students creating their own math goals. And I feel like that math goal piece was empowering for the kids because they could keep track of their math goals. I thought that was a major piece. So the first part was retakes. So shifting towards a standards-based grading approach. And in my district, we are non-standards-based grading. So we don't have 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s. It's A through D type of thing. And so first thing that I put into place, and my team has as well, is we introduced a met or not yet sheet to have students reflect more on the task. If there's an M on the sheet, then they have met the task. If there's an NY on it, they have not yet. So anything that they get incorrect automatically becomes a not yet. So it could be a simple error. It could be a whole misconcept. So retakes was the beginning of students really analyzing their work instead of shoving it into their desk or into their backpack. So if a student had to retake it, or actually they were required to retake it if they didn't get 100% correct, and they put the reasoning of why they had to retake it. They couldn't put simple mistake on there. And then they stapled this to the top of their sheet and resubmit. So students took time to look at their assignments in general. And this is not for every assignment. These were for particular quizzes that students would take in after instruction was given. So these were the not yet and met sheets that are stacked in an actual basket in my room right now. And when I pass back the quizzes, it either has an NY or an M on it. Students take it from the basket, staple it, and turn it back in. So that was the first part, is really integrating retakes into the actual classroom practice. And my teammates have been using this as well. They have different versions of it, but eventually moving towards retakes also changes the perception of it's not a one and done type of quiz. They have an opportunity to retake it and perform better the second time around. Here's some examples that you can see. I'm not going to be reading them word for word, but you can kind of grasp and see what specifically that they might have changed. A lot of them had to do with practice, maybe looking a little bit more carefully at the directions, or adding fractions where they might have forgot the denominator. And I actually keep all these. I use them for parent-teacher conferences as well to show how students have been growing over time. So the not yet met sheets have been very helpful in moving students' perceptions a bit towards less about points and more about our journey. And I take the highest score after they turn this in, so after their second attempt. So after the NYM sheets are passed out, I've noticed really 5 things. One, students are not as stressed out about quizzes. I will say, I don't know how we can eliminate all the stress from them, but they are definitely less anxious. They want to ask questions, which is, I'm like, having a 6th grader ask me questions about their math. I'm totally game on that. Absolutely, come up and ask me questions. And really, it also helps me with my own practice to make sure that I'm setting clear expectations and directions up front, and to make sure the students understand that before they turn it in. And then that last thing, number 5, it is still a work in progress. There's things that I'd like to change, I'd like to tweak, things that I'd like to maybe modify a little bit. If you can, in the comment section, feel free to add if you use retakes, or if you have experience using them. I'd like to know. The not yet met sheets were actually something out of the MitBoss community and the I Teach Math community that I kind of modified for my own. So it'll just be interesting to hear what others have experienced with that. But I've experienced some positive results from the NYM sheets. So I went from the NYM sheets to math goals. So students would complete the NYM sheets, and then I wanted students, let's make math goals. And this was about 2-3 years ago. I went ahead and I said, all right, let's set math goals today. I know it's important to set goals. Let's create goals. So I noticed I have the NYM on the one arrow, and I wanted it to go to math goals. So I created a big anchor chart with math goals. I said, I want to learn about geometry. I want to learn about pre-algebra. I want to learn about linear equations, things like that. I reviewed the classes, the possible misconceptions. We looked at the next unit, and I created some sample meaningful goals. The goals then, what the students came up with, were a bit different. These were the type of goals that the students made after we created the anchor chart. I'll let you just go ahead and read those. So apparently the goals were quite performance initiated, like getting 100%, writing clearly, making better math sentences to get everything right, get 0 wrong. And I really felt like a bad teacher after reading those. I felt like, what did I do wrong? I wanted them students to actually feel as though math is more of a journey, not just getting that 100% or feeling the pressure that comes with that. So I went ahead and I started to think of, okay, that was kind of a little bit of a fail there. Let's kind of backtrack a little bit and start to think about, how do we go from points to journey? And so students aren't so concentrating on that A or the B or whatnot. So I rerouted my direction and thought, why don't students look at their assessments, analyze their assessments, and then make goals based on how they perform on the assessments? That way we have some type of objective criteria. So right now, well, in general, this is just general practice. Student takes a test, it gets turned in, they get it back. And if they get a grade that's not so hot, you're going to find that eventually it ends up in the trash, or you're ending up calling home, or you're discussing it one-on-one with the student to see, okay, how can I do better at this? So I wanted to change the cycle, change the perspective on this of tests, because right now, even at that 6th grade level, there's a lot of pressure on it. The parents, they want to know when the test is. The kids want to know when the test is, because they feel like it's very high stakes, and we want to make sure that that the tests are not as highly influential in directing where the kids are learning and what they're learning. So I wanted the students to reflect on their math experience, and you can see in that little parentheses, not just experience the anxiety that comes from pressure or tests. So I do feel like there's a lot of anxiety that comes from pressure or tests, and I want to move kids away from that anxiety and empower them to, let's reflect on that. Let's look at our assessments and move forward on that. Terry Crooks, from that book, The 7 Strategies of Assessment for Learning, put this quote in there. I'll let you go ahead and read it. So in general, my gist from looking at this is, students are going to go ahead and take a look at the feedback if we first ask them, take a look at your performance without the teacher input. So without the red marks, the questions, how do you think you did? Where do you think you succeeded? Where do you think you might need some work? So this is really the basis of what was used for creating some of the material that you're going to be seeing later on in this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to sharing a screen here. And I'm going to share it, and we're going to try something a little bit different. This is my first time using this, so you're going to please bear with me here. But here is the code. I'm hoping you guys can see the screen. If you can, go to menti.com and then use that code 604379. And once you enter in the words, it will start populating. Okay, all right, I'm starting to see people coming in on there. All right. Okay, self-directed, student-centered, metacognition, ownership. Oh, these are great. Courage, empowering. Yeah, I see that metacognition, huge right there. Confidence, oh, I like that. It's great. Positive, honesty. Yeah, honesty is huge with this. Ownership. Oh yeah, these are great. Reflection. Growth, yes. Vulnerability. Yeah. All right. So we have a lot of actual pieces here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually take a quick screenshot of all those amazing words. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this screen to go back to the regular presentation here. All right, let's see here. Jill, is the presentation back? Hey, Jill.
No, we're not seeing it. Maybe I need to. I can redrop it in there. We may have to.
Oh, there you go.
Did it come back?
Yep. Thank you.
There you go.
All right. So those are some amazing words there, and definitely you're going to see some of those words as we continue through this presentation. So I wanted students to reflect on their actual achievement on the assessments. And I put in their parentheses, time is gold, because we know that. We only have a limited amount of time with the kids. And I try to squeeze every minute out of that time. And so I wanted to be mindful of that time as well, to make sure it's valuable and useful. So I thought here are 3 specific things. The student reflections after the assessment, they need to first be timely. I wanted to make sure they were intentionally planned out, organized, and actually meaningful to the student. Otherwise, I felt like they're worthless. So if it's not meaningful to the student, why are we reflecting on this? Especially if students need to make goals. So as far as test analysis, after students took a test and we went over it as a class, I categorized the actual test into concepts, which sometimes your curriculum, the resource that you use already has these problems are associated with these concepts. So the students go ahead and they circle the problem. So they circled problem 1, they might not have got that correct. That is dealing with measuring angles. 5, same thing. Maybe they didn't get that correct. 5 is circled. And then sometimes like I'll put a triangle around the correct answer. So students are aware that, you know, I'm looking at both the correct answers and the incorrect. I think sometimes students really focus on the incorrect, and then it just, all the things that were correct just get put to the side, which we don't want. So students go ahead and fill this out after the assessment. I'm not a part of this. They fill it out on their own, and then they look and see, okay, what are the concepts on the test? So I don't put points on this. It's just problems, concept. And so this is a little half sheet, and they put this in their math journal while they review the assessment. Here's another version of it. So moving kids away from the skills instead of the actual letter grade, or if you're standards based, it's like, you know, the 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatnot. So if they got anything incorrect in the problem, they still circle it. And then they put the amount circled in the concept. Students will often look and see, oh, I've got a category, a big cluster of problems that might not have been correct in data landmarks or in map skills, something like coordinate grids. So they start to analyze, they start to look at themes or trends. And so after they look at that chart, they look at what concept area do you feel you learned about the most during this unit? Again, I'm in the back, I'm not filling this out, the kids are. So they might look for areas where they didn't get anything wrong and say, I actually did really well with multiplying by factors or factoring specific numbers or linear equations. And then I have this one down here. This question is part of a prompt. Unit 3 had many different learning activities. What learning activity sticks out in your mind? So I want students to start thinking about their own thinking. The activities that were engaging or memorable, did that affect how well you performed on the assessment? So I'm not telling them they're right or wrong. This is more of their opinion for this in particular. And then we start going into analysis. So I might have a question number, correct. Why did you miss this question? Sure, explain how to get the correct answer. If a student gets it wrong because of a simple mistake, students generally know, okay, I forgot to use order of operations. Sometimes the kids have no idea why they got it wrong. And that's a time where, we can go ahead, talk with the student, say, what happened? Why is this incorrect? And I don't use this with every assessment. It might be if I find that there's a trend with specific questions. Natalie had a terrific tweet back in February, and I thought this was really interesting. So I asked her if I could use this and then screenshot it. But just go ahead and read it. So I feel like there's a line as far as if this is a small mistake or an actual lack of understanding. I think sometimes students think it was a simple mistake. It was definitely a simple mistake, but then you look back and then they're not able to actually conceptually show their understanding. And then you're like, actually, no, it's not a simple mistake. We need to go back and we need to definitely reteach or meet with them. So I think when students analyze, they have to be able to identify, is it a simple mistake or is it something more? So students are becoming better at error analysis. Why did they miss the problem? Sometimes the kids are like, I'm really not sure. I don't know why. And that's where I've done a few examples in front of the class of this is a simple mistake. This is something that leads me to believe there's something more. And it's okay to write that there's something more, that I might not completely understand the concept. I like that, fuzzy errors. That's great, Robin. So when students miss a problem, we have to start thinking, is it a conceptual or a simple mistake? Or we'll use Robin's fuzzy error. Are there gaps involved? Is there practice? Or are there next steps? Is it a computation issue? Is it a vocabulary issue? So as I was looking through these student responses on what they thought was, why they thought they missed the problem, it was not as simple as I thought. Just because they had the problem wrong on the test, does that truly mean that they don't understand it? So we're delving deeper into the reasoning of why something was incorrect. Or if it was just a simple mistake, or they flipped the signs or something like that. So here's another quote out of that 7 strategies of assessment. I'll go ahead and let you read that. So I find this quite a bit. I mean, working with kindergarten, first, second, and third, students are we want to encourage them and we want them to do well, and we sometimes really are by their side, cheering them on, keep it up, the effort's great. But then, then they think, well, no, that was just a simple mistake. I won't miss that next time. I'll do great. Where the older students, some of my 6th graders, it's more realistic. They're more cognizant of like what happened. They were in a rush, or they weren't there on the day that I taught it. And so they have to really look at what is happening in the classroom, and also like what experiences, and looking at what happened in their classroom last year or in the years prior. How did they experience math, and have they experienced self-reflection before, Or are they given the expectation of this is where you're at mathematically? Or, and I sometimes have this happen in conferences or open house, where it was like you have parents or siblings, or, I was great at math, you'll be great at math. Or I was a math person, you'll be a math person. Or I'm not a math person, you won't be a math person. And so I think sometimes kids internalize that automatically, and that's their identity. They've adopted it. And so with that adoption comes their own self-analysis and self-reflection. So I wanted kids to move away from the extremes, just like in certain issues like homework issues or grading issues. It's oftentimes it's not a black or white or a complete separate issue. There's some gray. So moving away from extremes for students that say, I don't need to work on anything, I'm doing fine, everything was a simple mistake, to this is horrible, I'm the worst, why am I even here? So moving away from these extremes can be a challenge, where we have to have kids look at and see, okay, there's a balance here. It's not I'm either good at math or I'm horrible at it. It's looking at where we're at in the gray area. You know what, I might not be great at these concepts yet, but I'm working towards becoming better. And it's really a transition. And looking at, back in the beginning of this presentation, of your math identity and the perspective and perception of math. So moving to focus on the effort, wins, and possible misconceptions. So focusing on that effort, the wins, and looking at errors or where we feel like we need to improve. So as students fill out the sheet that I showed you earlier, you can see at the top here, it shows that you've got, this is what we looked at earlier, where they go ahead and they circle possible incorrect answers. And then below, we're looking at what concept area do you feel you learned about the most? So this person add, subtract, multiply, and divide decimals. And then where could you improve? Data analysis, central tendency, and box plots, it looks like. So looking at that, and I tell the students, it doesn't necessarily have to be the area where you had incorrect answers. It also could be an area where maybe your quizzes weren't so hot in this, or you feel like you need some improvement. So, and the emphasis I have is in perceived strengths. So this is from the student's perspective. And I try to stay out of this as much as possible, because you know how quickly students can change their mind when a teacher says, well, no, I think you need to work on this. And so for some students, then they gravitate towards that aspect. So I want the students to perceive and look at where they feel like their strengths and concern areas are. And then looking at wins and improvement areas. So you've got, again, reviewing the chart. What do you feel like you learned about the most? Organize and represent data. Where could you improve? Multiply and divide decimals. And these sheets are given after assessments, and we give 8 assessments a year. So this is really only, one time, 1/8. And so we give them every month and a half or so. And in between them, there's progress monitoring, which we'll get to in a little bit. So reflecting on wins and improvement areas. So wins for this particular person was, let's see, finding area. So this person felt like they did really well in finding area. This one was finding volume. So wins and improvement areas. And when I first started it, this sheet, I had 2 wins and 2 improvement areas. And I found that some students would have trouble with coming up with wins, or they made them artificial. Like I was great at studying, and I'd like, no, let's look at a particular concept area. And so I went ahead and made the 2 in the improvement, but it doesn't always have to be that way. I've made some tweaks to this as the years have progressed. And then taking a look at mistakes turning into learning opportunities. So going back to that growth mindset, talking about math being a process. And mistakes happen, but learning from them is part of that process. So provide an example of how a mistake turned into a learning opportunity that helped you later. So this is a prompt that was given to a 3rd grader. And this is in their journal right after the reflection sheet. And then looking at, this is how I did on my homework, and I'm good because of the feedback. And then the success depends on your effort level and commitment. Provide one example where you needed to increase your effort level. So I think sometimes students might have different views on what does an increase in effort mean? What does a productive struggle mean? Isn't this math supposed to be quick? I've always gotten it. I've always had success here. So understanding that your grade and your achievement isn't the only aspect here that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about your math journey in general. So, but I don't think reflection awareness is the goal. It's important, but we can use that to make goals moving forward and taking a look at individual goals. So I had a second attempt. So, the first attempt was kind of a bust. They wanted to get 100%, A+, things like that. They wanted to make sure that they were, when they take their tests home, the parent is good with that. Their teacher is pleased. So I went ahead and had the test analysis happen. And then here's our second attempt at goal setting. So before we dug into it as a class, we started to look at, are the goals actually realistic and not related to a perfect score? Now, this took a while for students to really grasp as far as making goals. Like how can we make a goal that's not achievement oriented based on a percentile? And so we started to talk about how can we measure it? We talk about SMART goals and things like that. Is there a timeline? And in our case, the timeline was from the beginning of the next unit to the end of the unit. So we're about a month and a half. And are there support systems to help you? And I would put myself, the teacher, on as a support system, but I'd also say, okay, how about at home? And then I also have to think there's an equity piece there too. What supports can happen within the school outside of my classroom? Is there a homeroom? Are there math study skill classes, things like that? And then how often will we be checking in on the progress? Will we actually be creating the goal and then just checking it at the end? I hope not. Like, we need to have some steps along, otherwise we just forget the goal. And it was just kind of a mark in our journal and we never reflected on it. And then what are the next steps? If the kids already met the goal, what do we do next? So we started to discuss this beforehand. And then, is the goal actually unreachable or appropriate? This is, it was supposed to be a GIF, but GIFs don't come off really well in a PDF format. But this dog is going around and around this chair outside, trying to get its head on the pizza, but he misses it every time. So we have to think, is the goal actually unreachable, or is it true for that specific student? Okay, I think sometimes when students make goals, they might make them so far out there that we need to step it back a little. We need to moderate. Okay, we need to moderate, and we need to make sure that we have supports in place to make those goals. So, and also the prompts matter. Okay, timing is so important. We have, when you look at it, the amount of time we have with students is packed with so much math and content that reflecting has been now ingrained in part of the math routines that I have. So I've made it part of the class and have dedicated parts of that math routine to reflections. At first, when it was initiated, it was a bit of a challenge to connect the two because students thought, why are we writing in math class? Why are we journaling here? So I had to take a step back with the kids and said, this is really about metacognition and thinking about our journey in math. And it's not just a linear progression along a line. We all are on a different path. And so just looking in general at the timing piece. So I started to use these reflections. When I first started this unit, so this is after the assessment. These are sentence stems. So these get students to reflect a little bit more. So when I first started this unit on measurement, and then now I think, And then in this math class, I wonder, and then what they learned. This is the kicker right here, this thing. If I could do anything on the test again over, I would. And I find that students are really honest with this. Some of them are a little bit more particular, like they would possibly study more or concentrate more on line plots before the test. Or I would look at the pre-tests more, or I'd look over the quizzes. So a lot of study skill habits right there in that particular one. And then I want kids to also think about how they're working, as mathematicians. One thing I'm proud of, I want to remember and use for the future, the most difficult thing. Okay. And it's not always what's wrong. Sometimes I have kids write in here, the most difficult thing was the open response. I had everything correct, but it was challenging. And I had to really, really think about it. And then this last one really hits on the growth mindset. How am I growing as a mathematician? And these are, I don't ask the students to use all the lines. You can use as many as them as possible. It's not a complete sentence either. They're just continuing on. And I've had students who've asked for extra pages of this so that they can add on to it. And this goes in their math reflection journals that they keep with me all year. So I print these out, cut them, and then they tape them in their math journals. And so as the year progresses, they can look back and see the growth over time. I'm fortunate because I get to loop with some of my students. So sometimes I have 3 years worth of this. So it can be a great tool to show that growth. So in moving towards goals, after we finish a unit, I actually have them look at the next unit. So they preview the next unit. So they look in their journal. We use a consumable journal and study guides. Study guides like a pre-test basically. And then they look through that unit 6 or whatever the next unit is, and they write a problem that they look at, and they look at it and they say, I have no idea how to complete this. This is absolutely new to me. So if we're doing something about box plots and they've never seen the word box plot before, they might put that right in there. If we're doing linear equations and they see something that's brand new in there, they might write it right in there. I said, write whatever the problem is in there. And so we'll eventually get to it because we're going to get to everything in that unit, write it down. My 5th graders are doing, let's see, a shape hierarchy. So students they saw that word hierarchy and they weren't quite sure what that was all about. And so they wrote that in there. And then they take this and then they write that goal right there. So they create a goal based on that. And then I make sure there's a student signature, they initial, I initial, and we date it because we're going to come back to it. So this whole previewing the unit takes about 5-10 minutes. They look at their journal, and then there are some kids that look at it all. Oh, I got it, I'm good to go. But then, we look through it a little bit more carefully and we find out, okay, maybe I don't. Maybe there are some things in here that I'm not quite familiar with. And then we make the goals in that piece. And so moving forward, this is another reflection piece of being, what are you proud of? Why did you miss it? So we might look back at the reflection form and then use that to look at the preview for the next unit, because you might find similar topics in there. Some of us use resources that are cyclical, or they cycle from one unit to another. You might find new pieces just added on in challenge. So it's good to take a look at that. So going back to the reflection form, we have this piece, which was the earlier part. And then at 2 words that you use to describe your performance, do you feel like the problems that you missed were due to simple mistakes? What concepts area above you feel your strength? What do you think might need strengthening? So looking at that, we use this as part of our goal setting as well. And then at the end of the unit reflection, there's a small section where it will talk about your success depends on your effort level and commitment. Provide one example where you needed to increase your effort level to meet the expectations of the class. So I might have this as part of it. These are all just general templates, and based on how students do on that assessment, I might decide to use some of these, and some of these I might not. It really depends on how the students did for that particular unit. And then once we are looking at the preview, we talk about making that one math goal. And this was actually given back last May by the end of the school year. So looking at a math goal that you'd like to achieve by the end of the school year. So this is an example of the preview. This was actually not too long ago, February 27th. Write one problem that you're unsure of how to complete. This student decided to write bar models. So we were doing algebra, and we were learning how to use it with bar models, and create a goal based on this. So use bar models to solve equations. They signed it, I signed it, dated it. And this was on the 27th of February. And so we went ahead, and I'm going to go through the progress monitoring piece here of that particular page in a little bit. But this is all about reflection moving to goals. That this is the whole piece of students analyzing how they did, where the misconceptions might be or unknowns are, and then making goals based on that. So we're looking at analyzing, reflecting, looking at trends or preview, and then goal set. Oh, this is the hierarchy one down here. So taking a look at the hierarchy, the shape hierarchies. And then when I meet with the students, I look at this, and this person says this person says, I need to work on fraction division. So this is a one-on-one conversation where I have with the kid and says, what does that look like? What does working on fraction division look like? And then how do we turn that into a specific goal? And these are questions I have with the students. And then extending improvement areas. What will you do to ensure that you meet the goal? So now we're looking at the monitoring piece. Practice with rectangles. So we're looking at area. This was a third grader looking at the area of a rectangle. And so we start to discuss, how are you going to practice with rectangles? And that's a discussion we have. So then we look, once we make the goal and we have a solid understanding of the goal, we monitor progress. So this is the second sheet after the preview. So this is possibly like a couple weeks later. We review the goal. How close are you to achieving that goal? So not even close, or we met the goal. And then what evidence do you have? So when I put this on the students, you know, how can you show me that you are making progress towards the goal? And so students have come up and they say, I've been practicing with Khan Academy at home, or I've been using, you know, this study piece, or we've actually done this in class, so I'm making progress towards that. And then we sign off on it. And this is just meeting with a quick one-on-one. What's your goal? How close are you meeting the goal? So a quick check-in. So this is what the one student I mentioned earlier with the bar models. This was the second. This was on third, so March 3rd. So for I can use them, but not comfortably or fast. So this person can use the bar models, but not comfortably or fast yet. So we're making progress. So that's good. We're checking in on this particular goal that we have. And this piece literally took about a minute. I said, all right, I will say, all right, journal check. They'll take out their journals, and I'll go by table. They'll have them out. I'll go ahead, kneel real quick by them, look over it, sign. All right, move on, next. And then students will actually I have a little turn-in bin, and they'll post. If they want to talk more about it, they'll put a little post-it note, talk with Mr. C about this, and then we'll try to find some time opportunity, maybe during homeroom or something like that, where we can chat about it in more detail. Here's another version of it using a scale. I have found a scale to be pretty useful, especially for the kids 4th and 5th grade. I did, when I first started this, I said, have you met the goal or not yet? And I had kids circle the middle. And so I wanted students to be able to show if they were close to meeting it or not yet. And this is a consideration piece of after we get through a couple of units, I might have them fill this out. Where in unit 1, we worked through these specific things on data analysis. How do you feel like your effort level was, your attention to detail, your actual performance? So asking the students where they feel like they are in this. And then I have some questions on the side, considerations of like how to use it and maybe things to cover, because I really have an issue with attaching a percentile, because the whole idea was getting away from the percentile in itself. Because I want students to look at how they feel like they did. So when to meet one-on-one with the student. So this is an issue I have because I want the students to reflect. I want them to use that metacognition piece and self-reflect, but they also need to meet with me to kind of, connect, have that rapport, understand that we're on the same page, that we're working together for this particular goal. And so when do I tend to meet with them? And what does the meeting look like? So when I do meet with them, it's often student-led, question-based. I actually generally have the student speak first. I say, all right, well, so why are you here? And it's like, okay, to talk about our goal. Okay, what trends do you notice? Sometimes I have parents involved with this. Not all the time, though. And I'd say very few do I. We start looking at trends. We both sign off, and then we look at the progress monitoring piece. So when we meet, I will often have math centers going on. There'll be different technology pieces. I might have a Desmos. Students might be working on a Desmos task, or they might be working on the pre-assessment for the next unit. And then that's when I can pull them real quick and talk to them. Or during a math routine, I might have them all be working on estimation 180 or a Solve Me Mobile or a piece like that. Or they might be doing group work, and I might go and say, all right, I want to tackle groups 1, 2, and 3 today. I'm going to get 3, 4, 5 tomorrow. And really, it's just meeting them quick. It might be a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes tops, but it's really to check in and to see, okay, where are we at with our goal? Do you need anything from me for you to be successful in working towards this goal? And it's really that piece that I think is important, to have that quick connection. And some of the students actually prefer to do it digitally, like a Google Doc or a Google Sheet, and say, okay, here's my goal. And then I might type in the Google Doc, how are we doing with this? Where are we at as far as that? And they might type back to me later when they're doing their homework on some other assignment of saying, okay, this is how I'm doing. Right now I'm at a 5. I have met the goal. Or right now I feel like I'm at a 3. And so having that dialogue through a Google Doc or through technology might be one way to do it. Yeah, Google Classroom, yes. So really it's about developing a reflection cycle where the students take the assessment or a particular task. They analyze their assessment. They take a look at, they analyze how they did, they reflect on it, and then they set the goal. And so there's progress monitoring happening all the time as we go through this process. And so they set the goal at the beginning of the unit. We progress monitor, check in maybe 2, 3 times. And at the end of the unit, we can look, how did we do meeting our specific individual goal? All right, let's set a new goal for the new unit. And sometimes the goals are very similar because we're still working on them. So really it's about developing a reflection cycle within your classroom. And really I feel like this applies across the board as far as grades are concerned. 5th, 6th grade, I know in 7th grade there are teachers who do this as well. It might not be as in depth, but there are pieces of it that you can use, and it really gets the kids more involved in understanding that this is a journey, not just a checkpoint test, move on, checkpoint test, move on. And there's a goal piece of that. So, and with that, I've really enjoyed presenting this and talking about goal setting for students.
Okay, Matt, I grabbed a couple questions as we were going through here. The first one is, how many retakes do you allow?
Right now, there are 2. So I allow the students the first time that they complete it. That is their first. That is an attempt 1. So the second attempt, they fill out the NYM sheet. That is their second attempt that they have on it. So I take whatever it is after that. Good to go. So there's only one NYM sheet for the actual grade itself.
Okay.
So yeah, basically 2 attempts that they get.
Okay. Do you use different versions of the task on those retakes?
It's usually the same one, and I'll circle the problems. I'll highlight them. I might use Post-it notes with feedback on them. But I do offer other copies of the sheet too, because some students might just want to start over completely.
Okay, great. Another question was, when do you calculate the grades? Do you just do that quarterly or?
We're trimester based, so
Okay.
3 times a year.
When the problem combines multiple skills and concepts, how does that reflection work?
So based on the like, if it covers multiple pieces, we can split it up into, like, if it is an algebra or a measurement, I try to weigh it a little bit more heavily towards a particular one based on what it's assessing. I'll also leave a blank item on some of the templates to put it in if they feel like it matches a different category. So I'll leave a blank one, but usually I assign it for a particular strand.
Okay. And people are dying to know if you share any of these reflection sheets.
I do. They're right on the website, mattcoaty.com.
Okay. All right. And then if you have no time for conferences, you did there at the end kind of give us some suggestions on how to meet with students. Is that a critical part, do you think, of the reflection? Is that little one-on-one meeting that you have with them?
Yes. I don't think they would be as beneficial without a digital connection, through a Google class or just meeting one-on-one to check in. I feel like that signature piece is also powerful, like saying like they're committed to this type of thing.
All right, and then I'm just looking here on the chat, this last few things. The last one there, so any of your unit assessments include previously covered unit materials as well as current materials?
Yes, there are, on the assessments, there's often kind of a cyclical piece to it where they'll have the same concept, maybe unit 2 and unit 4. They might have similar concepts, but just a bit more rigorous, or there might be more intensity with that. So yes, and so that is actually helpful with goals, because then we can extend the goal to those particular concepts.
Great. I think everybody's just loving it. Great ideas and everything. I attached the link so everybody can find the mattcoaty.com website. Thank you, Matt, for sharing your wonderful ideas with us. I hope you'll be able to stick around if there's any other questions. Everyone in attendance, thank you for joining us tonight. Next week on March 17th, we're going to be doing a webinar called Creating a Thinking Classroom. From VNPS and VRG to the lessons to the aha moments. So please don't hesitate to join us next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Mountain Time on March 17th. Thank you, Matt, again for a wonderful presentation. And does anybody have any other questions that they want to post before I end the webinar? All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.